Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 443. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. It is a solo show today. Connor Freeman, the co-host, is usually here for the end of the week show. However, he is feeling under the weather, so he will be back early next week to give us an update on what's happening, particularly in Israel. There's a lot going on with Israel targeting Jenin and carrying out raids in the West Bank. So that's all pretty significant, but maybe just with a couple more days of developments, Connor could give us an idea of if this is really a part of a new policy for the Israeli government, or maybe just, more of a one-off event type raid on Jenin because of the Palestinian resistance to the Israeli occupation there. So look forward to getting some of those news stories in the show next week, but we got plenty to talk about on today's show: Russia, China, Syria. So just going to get right into it. Want to remind people to share the show. Is hosted at the Libertarian Institute. We repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version of the show. And you can support the show just by subscribing wherever you listen to audio podcast or finding the show. I have Twitter at KyleAnzalone_ and giving it a retweet, sharing it out there. Really appreciate it. Anybody could do that kind of stuff. And let's get into the news today. All right, our first story today is by Connor Freeman. GOP pushes back on White House effort to renew intel agency spying tool. So Connor writes, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, but particularly in the GOP, are pushing back against a renewal of a law authorizing a tool used by the U.S. spy agencies in the post-9/11 era to conduct warrantless surveillance on foreign targets and Americans with whom they may be interacting. The New York Times took aim at the conservatives for no longer being staunch supporters of the mass surveillance state. Congressional leaders in both parties have warned the White House that the law which legalizes unconstitutional surveillance of American citizens, that is Section 702, will not be renewed absent significant changes. For instance, such reforms would prohibit federal agents from obtaining phone, email, and other electronic communication records of Americans interfacing with targeted foreign individuals. This is from Representative Jim Jordan. He's a Republican from Ohio. There is no way we are going to be for reauthorizing that in its current form. No possible way. Adding, we're concerned about surveillance, period. Congress ostensibly granted the spying agencies this authority by creating Section 702 of the FISA Amendments Act in 2008. Since then, it has been renewed twice with strong GOP backing, but for years this law faced opposition from Democrats over similar contemporary conservative concerns that it grossly violates American civil liberties. The expiration date on the law is coming up in December, but growing animosity towards the spy bureaucracy's abuse of power has led to a surge of resistance on the Republican side as well. And this is from Matt Gaetz. You couldn't waterboard me into voting to reauthorize 702. These authorities were abused against people in Washington on January 6th, and they were abused against people who were affiliated with the BLM movement, and I'm equally aggrieved by both of these things, Gaetz said. And it's important to note that Gaetz supported the reauthorization of 702 5 years ago, so I think that shows part of the shift in the Republican Party. Despite nominal reforms in the past, the 2018 renewal enhanced the ability of the intelligence agencies to carry out massive surveillance of Americans, as the Electronic Freedom Foundation explains. The bill was most recently passed, and that's S.139, endorsed nearly all warrantless searches of a database containing Americans' communications collected under 702. It allowed the restarting of about collection and invasive type of surveillance that the National Security Agency ended in 2017 after being criticized by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, that's the FISA court, for privacy violations, and it included a 6-year sunset, delaying Congress's best opportunity to debate the limits of NSA surveillance. In order to gain the favor of Republicans who favor a more bellicose policy against Beijing, supporters of the sweeping powers to spy on Americans are hoping to shift the conversation to China. In the Asia Pacific, more than a decade ago, Barack Obama's administration launched the largest military buildup since the Second World War, eyeing a future war with Beijing. While Donald Trump substantially expanded the encirclement of China during his term, Joe Biden and his government have been vastly more aggressive than their predecessors. The White House has doubled down on preparations for collection and concurrently ramped up its economic war against China. However, many Republicans see Biden as weak and agitate for a more confrontational posture with China. With this in mind, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has implored this surveillance capability as crucial to counter China, as well as other supposed national security threats like Russia. The Biden team is busy making the case with lawmakers. This strategy may not be successful, according to the Times, as the Republicans in the opposition camp have seized on official determinations that federal agents botched wiretaps on a Trump campaign advisor and more recent disclosures that FBI analysts improperly used Section 702 to search information of hundreds of Americans who came under scrutiny in connection with the January 6th and the Black Lives Matter protests after the 2020 murder of George Floyd by a police officer. Even some typically jingoistic Democrats in the House are reluctant to go along with the administration, and this is Representative Jason Crow, a Democrat from Colorado, who is really one of the biggest hots in Congress. We've been very clear with the administration that we are not going to be, it's not going to be a clean reauthorization. There's no path to that. So that's very interesting because, this guy is mainstream, and my inclination here is to be kind of pessimistic about this, especially since the debate is starting now and we have 6 months until this expires. And so that gives Congress a lot of time to figure out some legal maneuvering to make it sound to the American people like you're not reauthorizing massive surveillance, but at the same time, reauthorize massive surveillance for the government, mass surveillance for the government. And so, they could stick into a different appropriations bill or find a different way to kind of sneak some, more government power to abuse the Fourth Amendment rights of Americans into legislation. And at the same time, nominally say they are reforming 702 of the FISA Act. So I'm hoping for some good news here. It's great to see the political shift on this issue so many times over the past 8 years in particular. It seems like the Republicans only get worse and the Democrats stay worse. Or I guess the Democrats get worse and the Republicans stay bad. But, this is one rare instance where you do have some principled Democrats like Ron Wyden. You do have even some hawkish Democrats like Jason Crow, and then you have a good number of Republicans, including powerful Republicans like Jim Jordan, Matt Gaetz, who are against this. Maybe we do see some meaningful reform on the mass surveillance when this comes up in December. All right, moving on here. Ukraine defense minister says his country is a great testing ground for Western arms. And this was in an interview with the Financial Times published on Wednesday. The defense minister said that Ukraine's Western backers can see how their weapons work in a war against Russia to see if they are efficient or need upgrades. For the military industry of the world, you can't have a better testing ground, he said. The defense minister made similar comments last year when asking the U.S. and NATO allies to send more weapons. We are interested in testing modern systems in the fight against the enemy, and we are inviting arms manufacturers to test the new products here. In an interview on Wednesday, the defense minister said the U.S. officials were very happy when Ukraine's military reported that U.S. Patriot missile systems downed a Russian hypersonic missile. He said that the U.S. called the news fantastic. And this is interesting, by the way. And for people wondering, because my understanding is the Patriot system isn't actually designed to be able to shoot down a hypersonic missile. And I believe what's happening here, and I read some reporting in the Wall Street Journal that kind of led me to this. And also, if you look at how the Saudis have been apparently somewhat effective in protecting their assets with Patriot missiles from, ballistic missiles fired from the Houthis, who are far less advanced than the Russian missiles. But still, my understanding is that they are able to determine what target the missile is attempting to hit. And then you're not really trying to hit a bullet with a bullet. You're trying to put a roadblock in place of that missile. And so if you determine that, this missile is traveling in this direction at this speed, I guess they have a reasonable ability. It probably depends on the target and everything like that, to be able to calculate what building, what asset that missile is aiming at, and then to fire a Patriot missile along that trajectory to intercept it. I'm not sure how effective this is, or how cost effective this is, because those Patriot missiles are hundreds of thousands of dollars each, the interceptors. But at least in one case, they were apparently able to hit one of these hypersonic missiles. So there's this article is so interesting. The defense minister admitting this, because of course you would think from the Ukrainian perspective that would just be, selling their soldiers and just shedding blood for nothing. To test weapons is such a cruel and dark way to go about warfare. But I do think that's a part of what's going on here from the Western perspective, at least. All right, everybody. Next up here, Lithuania says NATO will give Ukraine a lot at upcoming summit. And this was a statement made by the Lithuanian president. And we've been talking about this upcoming summit. It's going to be next week, starting Tuesday, July 11th. And it'll also go to the 12th. It's in Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania. And it's a meeting, I believe all the leaders of NATO countries are expected to attend. I haven't read particularly anybody who's planning on sitting out. There could always be like additional factors, like the Biden administration may decide that the president can't go for some reason and send someone else high ranking in the administration. But I do think we're going to see pretty much all high ranking world leaders in NATO at this summit. So there has been intense debate among NATO of what they were going to do here. The Eastern European countries, at least the Eastern European countries, it's unclear, if this includes maybe London, some of the Black Sea states and stuff, but certainly Poland and the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia have been very much encouraging NATO to make very significant pledges to Ukraine at this summit. I'm not sure that goes all the way to giving them full-on membership at the summit, or if this means just giving them a timeline or a promise that once the war is over, no matter what happens, Ukraine is going to get membership. It doesn't seem like the actual agreement, whatever Ukraine is going to get, goes that far. Zelensky has been demanding that, saying that Ukraine would boycott the summit if they wouldn't get it. But it does seem that there's a pretty major consensus that there will be a agreement to pursue an Israel model relationship with Ukraine. And that, I think, means arming Ukraine in a way that basically only NATO countries, Taiwan and Israel, get armed by the West. And so, the promise here is continuing the proxy war, not one day inviting Ukraine into NATO. I do think there will be some kind of statement that does sound stronger than the 2008 statement NATO made, promising Ukraine and Georgia one day they would eventually get future membership in NATO. However, I don't think it's going to, that statement is going to be anything extremely significant as far as making any concrete pledges to Ukraine. And we have heard from the U.S. ambassador to NATO, that is Julianne Smith, who basically said that most of us feel confident that we are going to be able to come to an agreement that will reflect where we are, and that the Ukrainians believe and feel is something above and beyond restating Bucharest. And so again, they're going to go beyond that, but I think most of the commitments are going to be weapons and not promises of future membership or what steps Ukraine would need to take to get membership, to be guaranteed membership once the war is over. All right, here, Dave DeCamp, Net's piece. Report, U.S. will provide Ukraine with cluster bombs as part of a new weapons package. The AP reported Thursday that the Biden administration has decided to arm Ukraine with cluster bombs and will announce the munitions as a part of a new $800 million arms package. The news comes as Human Rights Watch issued a report that said Ukraine has killed its own citizens with the munitions. U.S. officials told AP that they expect the arms package to be announced on Friday. The White House used to be opposed to arming Ukraine with cluster munitions as they are an indiscriminate weapon that cause harm to civilians, but those concerns have waned. Cluster bombs scatter small submunitions over a large area, making them especially hazardous to civilians who can find unexploded munitions years after they were dropped. Because of their indiscriminate nature, cluster munitions have been banned by more than 100 countries, although the U.S., Ukraine, and Russia are not parties to the treaty known as the Convention on Cluster Munitions. The Human Rights Watch report said that Ukrainian cluster munition rockets attacked in the eastern city of Ukraine in 2022 killed at least 8 civilians and wounded 15 more. Human Rights Watch also reported that Russia has used cluster bombs in the war and has killed many civilians. Ukraine's use of cluster bombs on people living in Eastern Territory goes back to 2014 when the war first broke out in the Donbass. That year, Human Rights Watch issued a report saying that Kiev was using the controversial munitions against populated areas of the Donetsk. The use of cluster munitions in populated areas violates the laws of war due to the indiscriminate nature of the weapon, and many amount to war crimes. According to Truth Out's Daryl Kimball, the executive director of the Arms Control Association, he issued a statement on Thursday warning the U.S. about sending cluster bombs to Ukraine. He said doing so would be escalatory, counterproductive, and only further increase the damage to civilians caught in the combat zones who will someday return to their cities, towns, and farms. And I guess something else to note here is that, not to discount the cost of human lives and things like that, but this is going to be extremely expensive to clean up. If you look at Laos and Cambodia, the U.S. And other agencies around the world spend, I'm sure the Laos and Cambodian governments had to spend tons of money every year on trying to identify these bomblets and destroy them before farmers or children end up stumbling upon them and killing or maiming themselves. So here's some good news. IAEA says no signs of explosives at Zaporizhia nuclear plant. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, said Wednesday that its inspectors have seen no signs of explosions at the Russian-controlled Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, that's the ZNPP, in Ukraine, despite claims from Kiev that Russia had planted the bombs. According to an IAEA press release, the Director General, Rafael Grossi, said the agency's experts have in recent days and weeks inspected parts of the facility, including some sections of the perimeter of the large cooling pond, and have also conducted regular walk-downs across the site so far without observing any visible indication of mines or explosives. The press release said Grossi requested more access to the ZNPP, specifically the rooftops of reactors 3 and 4 is essential, as well as access to parts of the turbine halls and some parts of the cooling system of the plant. Grossi said with military tensions and activities in the region where this major nuclear power plant is located, our experts must be able to verify the facts on the ground. Their independent and objective reporting will help clarify the current situation at the site, which is crucial at times like this with unconfirmed allegations and counter allegations. And I think that is really why this statement by the IAEA is so critical here, is essentially said to the Ukrainians that no, what you're saying about this power plant, what you're saying about what Russia is plotting to do here is not true. And I think that this statement by the IAEA prevents Ukraine from being able to launch a attack on the ZNPP and claim it was Russia, because what they're saying that Russia was going to do, this UN based agency that is supported by all these Western nations, is saying that the Ukrainian, kind of, I guess their false flag proposal, their accusations towards Russia are simply not correct. And if those aren't correct, then you can't really launch an attack and claim it was Russia, because the IAEA has already kind of downplayed that. And then we get this on July 6th from Ukraine. Ukraine's military intelligence chief said Thursday that the threat to the Russian-controlled Zaporizhia nuclear power plant is subsiding. And so it's very interesting that as soon as the IAEA throws cold water on Kiev's accusations, we have this statement from the Ukrainians saying, there's really not a threat to the ZMPP. Funny how that works. All right, next up here, maybe this is good news. Maybe this is some bad reporting. I haven't decided yet. So we have a group of former senior U.S. officials have held talks with influential Russians, including Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, in an effort to lay the groundwork for negotiations to end the war in Ukraine, NBC News reported on Thursday. However, later in the day, the Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson called the report fake and said it was disinformation spread by the West. And so I don't know. If this turns out to have more legs to this story, I think I could go through and break it down. We could talk about some of the people who are reported to be at the meeting. When I first read the story, it surprised me that the meeting had occurred with such a high-ranking Russian official in April and hadn't been reported to July. And I guess the Russians could be expected to deny it, so that shouldn't necessarily mean that this definitely didn't happen. But I have some suspicions that the reporting from NBC News isn't completely correct. So I just want to note that on that article. Next up here, NATO chief says most Wagner forces have not gone to Belarus. And, this is the fallout from the rebellion that was put together by Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner group. He was living in Belarus for a short time, and then there was all this concern from NATO that the 30,000 Wagner men in uniform for them are going to end up in Belarus, and this is going to be some kind of threat to Lithuania or Poland. We even heard this from the Lithuanian government, as Germany agreed to deploy another 4,000 troops to Lithuania, that they were concerned about what was happening in Belarus. Although now it's not even clear that Prigozhin is in Belarus, and there's reports that he is actually in Russia. So a lot of questions about that whole story still. All right, everyone. Next up, let's talk about some China news. China military says U.S. turning Taiwan into powder keg with arms sales. The Chinese Defense Ministry on Wednesday said the U.S. was turning Taiwan to a powder keg in a warning over the Biden administration's approving new arms deals for Taiwan worth $440 million. And so we have heard this rhetoric from China in the past, and we did cover these arms sales on the show last week. They're $332.2 million in 30 millimeter ammo and related equipment, and then another $100+ million in spare parts for a variety of military equipment. Now, that's not all. The U.S. isn't taking that message from China and trying to turn down tensions or anything like that. It actually seems like the U.S. is looking to sell Taiwan more weapons. We have Taiwan is planning to purchase a mine laying system from the U.S., and this has sparked protests within Taiwan's government. So the Taiwanese defense minister announced last week that it would be purchasing volcano vehicle launch scatterable mine systems and related equipment from Northrop Grumman as a part of a deal worth $441 million. The arms sale was initially approved by the Biden administration in December last year. According to the government procurement notice, the mines won't be delivered until 2029. The Taiwanese military said the volcano system could be used to rapidly deploy mines to repel an amphibious invasion. So this is Taiwan's Army Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Chang Wan-hus. He said, if the Taiwanese military knows where hostiles will be landing and can use the systems to lay landmines swiftly on certain parts of the beach rather than on the entire beach. Lo Chin Cheng, the Taipei city councilor from Taiwan's opposition Kuomintang, warned that the mines could harm civilians. With the capacity to swiftly litter a large area with mines, it's possible that the deployment of the system could turn Taiwan into an island of landmines, and no one can say for sure the mines pose no risk to people. And so, more weapon sales to Taiwan, but it's good to see some pushback from Taiwan internally. This from July 4th, date to camp at antiwar.com. Taiwan's Thai hosts another U.S. congressional delegation to Taipei. And so this is a Taiwanese president, and she met a delegation led by Representative Kevin Hearn, and he's a Republican from Oklahoma. And it's the second time within a week that a group of U.S. lawmakers have visited the island. And this is extremely provocative to China. There's not supposed to be meetings between the Taiwanese and the American government. The U.S. is supposed to recognize one government for Taiwan and China, and that is supposed to be the government in Beijing. And so the way the U.S. is conducting and carrying on with its relationship with Taiwan, constantly increasing support for Taipei, is being seen increasingly provocative by China. All right, the U.S. plans naval logistics hub in India as part of a buildup against China. And this is another really important thing to understand about the U.S.-Chinese relationship. It's not just that the U.S. is provoking China and Taiwan, but they're also provoking China by supporting India, by supporting Australia, by all these military buildups in the region, all these small Pacific Island nation countries, in Japan and South Korea and the Philippines, constantly saying and pushing back against all of China's territorial claims. So the U.S. wants to turn India into a center for resupplying and maintenancing of naval vessels in South Asia as a part of a military buildup against China in the region. The U.S. has no military bases in India, but has been working on increasing military ties with New Delhi in recent years. Indian Prime Minister Modi recently visited Washington and signed a slew of defense agreements with President Biden. The U.S. will provide India with support to develop infrastructure to resupply, repair, and maintenance ships and aircraft. The Pentagon spokesperson, Brigadier General Pat Ryder, said the aim is to make India a logistics hub for the United States and other partners in the Indo-Pacific region. All right, and then it's deeper than just all the military buildup against China. We are also waging an economic tariff war against China. Report: the U.S. looks to restrict Chinese companies' access to cloud technologies. The U.S. is looking to restrict Chinese companies' access to cloud computing technology in a move that could further strain relations between Washington and Beijing, the Wall Street Journal reported on Tuesday. The Biden administration has significantly escalated the trade war against China by imposing sanctions last year to restrict the export of advanced semiconductors and semiconductor manufacturing equipment to China. The U.S. has also pressured other countries that export the technology to impose similar measures. The Journal report said that the new rule would require the U.S. cloud computing companies to seek permission before providing cloud computing services that would use advanced artificial intelligence chips to Chinese customers. The idea is to prevent companies in China from gaining access to computing capabilities via cloud services that could use advanced semiconductors. The U.S. put export controls on. So, not sure how how this develops and what China's response is. It's always a little bit, at least for me, more difficult to figure out when it's on the economic end than the military end. But it's interesting that the report comes as I saw a lot of reporting that Janet Yellen, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, was visiting China, where she was expected to improve relations between Washington and Beijing. And certainly this report from the Wall Street Journal is going to throw cold water on that. All right, quick Korea story here. U.S. nuclear-capable B-52 bombers fly to Korean Peninsula in latest provocation. This occurred, I believe, on Monday. It was July 2nd, so that's Sunday. Oh, it was actually a week ago. It was last Friday. So the South Korean Defense Ministry and the U.S. military said the bombers participated in exercises and were joined by U.S. and South Korean fighter jets. And this is from the U.S. forces in Korea. The training offered the alliance an opportunity to further strengthen its interoperability by demonstrating a combined defense capability, rapid deployment, and extending deterrence in the defense of the Korean Peninsula. And then Dave DeCamp wrote this article, of course. The U.S. started sending bombers back to the Korean Peninsula last year when two B-1B bombers made the trip for the first time since 2017. Now, U.S. bomber flights to the peninsula are a regular occurrence as tensions between Seoul and Pyongyang are soaring. According to Air and Space magazine, Friday's B-52 deployment marked the seventh time in the last 6 months that B-52s or B-1s have flown near the Korean Peninsula. The U.S. is planning to dock a nuclear-armed submarine in South Korea for the first time since 1981. President Biden and South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol announced the plan in April, but it's not clear when the nuclear submarine will actually arrive. Because the U.S. nuclear-armed submarines can be patrolling waters anywhere in the world at any time and carry long-range missiles fired from a strategic perspective, docking one in South Korea serves no purpose other than a provocation towards North Korea, which, of course, North Korea usually does something in response to these actions. It's not clear if they're going to test a missile or maybe carry out their own provocative flights near the DMZ or something like that. All right, here, let's talk about Syria before we wrap up. I got an article here. U.S. accuses Russia of harassing drones over Syria. The Pentagon released a video of a Russian fighter jet flying near an American drone above Syria. Moscow and Washington have accused each other of conducting unsafe aerial operations over the country. U.S. Central Command, that's CENTCOM, released footage on Wednesday showing the Russian Su-35 fighter jet and the U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone. In a press release, the Department of Defense said the Russian aircraft caused the drone to take evasive maneuvers. And the report said one Russian pilot positioned their aircraft in front of an MQ-9 and engaged the afterburners, dramatically increasing speed and air pressure, which reduced the MQ-9 operator's ability to safely operate the aircraft. The video showed the Su-35 releasing flares in the drone's flight path. The Pentagon said the Russian planes engaged in a new level of unprofessional and unsafe action. Last month, the Department of Defense announced it was moving F-22s into the region to deter unprofessional and unsafe actions taken by Russian pilots. And then this is from the CENTCOM head, General Michael Kurilla. Russian forces' unsafe and unprofessional behavior is not what we expect from a professional air force. The regular violation of agreed upon airspace deconfliction measures increases the risk of escalation or miscalculation. Moscow has accused American pilots of targeting Russian planes within Syrian skies. And this is from a rear admiral of the Russian military. The so-called international coalition led by the United States continues to flagrantly violate the deconfliction protocols and the Memorandum of Understanding on Air Safety in Syria. Pilots of the U.S. Air Force are still recorded to be activating weapon systems and then approaching in mid-air the aircraft of the Russian aerospace forces that fly sorties in eastern Syria. The U.S. and Russia have been on opposite sides of the war in Syria. However, using a deconfliction line and regular communication has helped to avoid direct clashes between American and Russian aircraft. As the relationship between the White House and the Kremlin has deteriorated over Washington's support for Kiev, it appears Russian and American aircraft are engaging in dangerous maneuvers in other regions. In March, two Russian Su-27 fighter jets dumped fuel on an MQ-9 drone operating over the Black Sea, causing the Reaper drone to crash. All right, next story on Syria here was written by Connor Freeman. Very important. While on the campaign trail, President Joe Biden spoke with some Syrian American activists who favored increased sanctions on the country as well as a regime change in Damascus during a private fundraiser in Maryland last month. According to neoconservative columnist Josh Rogan, one of Bill Kristol's proteges, Biden told the regime change advocates that, among other things, Assad must go. Rogan said the activists took advantage of their audience with Biden to implore him to do more to oppose Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Ala Talo, a Syrian American from Massachusetts, says she declared to Biden that Assad must go, referring to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, to which the President Biden replied, "I agree." That rallying cry was first uttered in 2011 when the then President Barack Obama began launching its dirty war against Damascus, an ultimately failed but extremely bloody regime change effort. Al-Qaeda affiliated militants and the Islamic State fighters waged a war against the people of Syria and its government that is estimated to result in the death of more than 500,000 people. The terrorist forces that carried out the failed regime change attempt were supported often by the CIA and its allies, including the British, the French, Israeli, Saudi, Turkey, and Qatar. Consequently, Russia maintains a significant military presence in Syria, having intervened at the request of Assad in 2015 to help beat back the ISIS and Al-Qaeda elements that were wreaking havoc. And this is really critical. They were pushing on Damascus. Assad could have been overthrown by al-Baghdadi. We could be looking at either Jolani, the head of Al-Qaeda in Syria, or Baghdadi as ruling Damascus at this point had Russia not intervened in that war. Of course, saying that Assad must go is absolutely a horrific thing. Connor has a lot of other details in this article that are really important. I recommend everybody check it out. It's published at the Libertarian Institute. All right, next up here. CENTCOM says it conducted 37 operations against ISIS in Iraq and Syria in June. And so, the U.S. is still very busy in the Middle East, and I think this helps explain some of the reason why there's so much tension between American and Russian fighter jets right now, with communication between the sides being not so great, and the U.S. carrying out so many operations in Syria. It's likely that we're going to see this continue to happen in the months to come. All right, now this is a follow-up from a drone strike that was carried out on May 3rd. And initially they claimed, the CENTCOM, the Pentagon claimed they killed a senior Al-Qaeda leader, but it was later revealed that the victim was a 56-year-old father of 10 who was herding sheep in the Idlib countryside, had nothing to do with Al-Qaeda whatsoever. And so now 21 organizations have sent a letter to Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin calling for the Pentagon to conduct a transparent investigation into the strike that killed a civilian. Now, I'm not expecting much. We shouldn't expect any accountability or anything like that. We had the strike in Afghanistan, the drone strike that they claimed killed a terrorist and later was confirmed to kill an aid worker who worked for an American agency, 2 other adults and 7 children. And initially that was claimed to be a righteous airstrike by our chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley, later to be discovered to be just an attack on civilians, and yet nobody lost their jobs or were punished for that. So, this one sheep herder in who knows where, Syria, is unlikely to ever receive justice since he was killed by the American Empire. All right, and it's not just, of course, the tensions in Syria that have to do with, Russia versus the United States, the terrorists that are still running around the countryside of that country, and all the other problems that are in Syria, but Israel regularly bombs Syria as well. And so last week, or I guess this was Sunday, so almost a week ago now, Israel targeted the Syrian city of Homs, and then this is a report from the Syrian news agency. At around 12 12:20 a.m. today, the Israeli enemy carried out an air aggression from the direction northeast of Beirut, targeting some points within the vicinity of the city of Homs. And so this continues to happen. Syria is just trying to beat off and retake its territory from terrorists, and we have the U.S. in part, but also Israel, Turkey, and other countries preventing from Assad from retaking all of this territory from the terrorists. So that's a pretty big deal, something to talk about. All right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. We'll be back with more shows later in the week.